Hello, everyone. My name is Suzanne Adely. I am the president of the National Lawyers Guild and a member of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. Both of these organizations are co-hosts of today's webinar on the topic of the imperialist war in Iran. We just sort of lost one of our oh, there she's back. We wanted to have today's webinar for many reasons, and among them that we feel that there's a lack of real coverage in the media as to what's happening in this war, and there's a real lack of what the goals of this aggression are on the part of the U.S. and the Zionist entity known as Israel. There's a lack of acknowledgement of the power and loyalty of the Iranians, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and its people. And there's a lack of understanding of what's at stake for the region and for the world. And I wanted to invite these three wonderful women, colleagues of mine, who I believe have a lot of important knowledge, both historical and current, um, about the situation, and in particular, what it means for the future of the work that we do, the struggles that we engage in, for liberation and anti-imperialism. And that the hosts of this have to come back to this question of international law, and particularly the peace right of resistance and sovereignty and self-determination and the responsibility of states, to act in furtherance of those principles, right? Instead of like the sort of shit show we see happen in the UN Security Council consistently, like last night. And, we want to talk a little bit about that. I've heard some, good commentary on what that really represents and what that means and what it doesn't mean, right? Um, and so, in that light, I just want to actually read a small excerpt from a statement that the IDL and the NLG both put out in regards to the aggression against Iran. One second. I will share this in the chat for those who haven't seen this before. But among some of the things the statement is that the fact that this aggression out to facilitate a regime change that they would find amenable to their goals of total domination of the entire region of West Asia, deprive the Palestinian people under occupation and facing an ongoing genocide of support for their capacity to resist and free themselves. Urge all states to provide all necessary assistance consistent with their obligations under international law to the Islamic Republic of Iran, Palestine, and other nations subjected to unlawful aggression by the U.S. and Israel, as well as to serious violations of international law, including genocide. We underline that this aggression is a threat not only to all the peoples and nations of the West Asian region, but to the future of multilateralism, international law, and the territorial integrity of states. Iran, a sovereign nation, has the clear and legitimate right to defend itself against this unlawful aggression. We urge all states to immediately implement an arms embargo on Israel and the U.S. withdraw their ambassadors and pursue legal actions to hold their military and political officials accountable. However, we cannot rely solely on the states or international institutions to end this aggression. We urge all supporters of justice, sovereignty, peace, and international law to participate in mass demonstrations and actions against the imperialist aggression on Iran and to mobilize popular pressure to bring this aggression to an end. I won't continue. I will share this statement in the chat for those of you later. And now I just want to introduce our speakers in order of the program, beginning with Niloufer Bhagwat, who is an advocate since 1971 at the High Court in Bombay, the Supreme Court of India, other courts and tribunals, and before the commissions of inquiry. She's a former professor of comparative constitutional law for postgraduate studies and administrative law and international law for the undergraduate studies at the University of Mumbai, vice president of the Indian Association of Lawyers and of the Confederation of Lawyers for Asia and the Pacific region. She's on the panel of judges at the International Criminal Tribunal for Afghanistan at Tokyo, constituted by Japanese jurists and lawyers investigating the U.S. political leadership for crimes of aggression, genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity in Afghanistan. She participated in the International War Crimes Tribunal on Iraq and at Istanbul. She was president of the International War Crimes Tribunal for the Middle East at Lebanon, convened by jurists and lawyers of the Middle East to try crimes of aggression, genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. She has published research articles in international and Indian journals, and she also is a colleague of ours in the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. Thank you so much, Niloufer, for joining us from India. After Niloufer, we will hear from Corinna Mullin, who is an anti-imperialist academic who teaches political science and economics. Her research examines the historical legacies of colonialism and the role of capitalist expansion and imperialist imbrications in producing peripheral state security dependency with a focus on unequal exchange, super exploitation, resource extraction, and other forms of surplus value drain, transfer, as well as resistance. Corinna has also researched and published academic works on broader imperialism struggles around the colonial capitalist university, fascism, multipolarity, and national liberation, with a focus on the Maghreb, West Asia, and Turtle Island. Corinna was a member of the steering committee of the International People's Tribunal on U.S. imperialism and organizes with CUNY for Palestine and Labor for Palestine. She serves on the steering committee of the Professional Staff Congress at CUNY, City University of New York's International Committee, and is a member of the Delegate Assembly. She is also a member of the Advisory Committee for the Observatory of Food Sovereignty and the Environment in Tunisia. Additionally, Corinna is an associate editor for Middle East Critique and serves on the Manuscript Review Collective for Science and Society. Our last speaker will be Nina Farnia, who is a longtime colleague of ours in the NLG. She's a legal historian focusing on the role of modern imperialism in U.S. law and politics. Her publications explore a variety of related subjects, including U.S. foreign affairs, economic coercive measures, and the rise of fascism. Her doctoral dissertation, Imperialism in the Making of U.S. Law, 1940 to 2008, is the 2023 co-winner of the Julian Mazie Dissertation Award from the Association for the Study of Law, Culture, and the Humanities, and is the basis of her forthcoming book, Imperialism and Resistance, being published this year by Stanford University Press. She is a longtime supporter of IDL and the former president of the San Francisco chapter of the NLG. And Nina's family hails from Iran. Welcome, everyone. And I'm going to give the floor to Niloufer.
Dear colleagues, we are at a defining moment in contemporary history. After centuries of the domination of the European world, which includes the Anglo-Saxon and Zionist entities, the United States of America in the 21st century has and had no enemy. It is the political and economic system of the United States which makes it addicted to war. And I would like to cite here an eminent judge of the Supreme Court of the United States of America, Justice Louis Brandeis, who said in a dissenting judgment that we have given such extraordinary and wide powers to the corporations and financial institutions of the United States of America, that if these institutions are not regulated, the ensuing slavery of the citizens of the USA, as well as around the world, will be worse than the African American slavery. Through this forum, I address the people of the United States that the war against Iran is a continuation of the legacy of European colonization, United States imperialism and colonization. Two, because the United States, unfortunately, from the inception, was incorporated as United States Incorporated, with extraordinary powers for its plantation companies, which enslaved the African American people, and thereafter, which extended its tentacles around the world. What is the objective of this war against Iran, this aggression against Iran, the attempt to destroy the people of Iran? It is the continuation of the dollar as the reserve currency, even though the economic situation in the United States, the 40 trillion debt and counting of the companies, corporations, and the government of the United States has revealed to the world a huge economic crisis, which it desires to transfer to the shoulders of the rest of the world in continuation of the pillage of centuries of earned income and resources, which it has seized from the rest of the world. Even in the 1970s, it was said that a population of approximately 3 to 5% of the people of the United States, which a population of 3 to 5% of the world, was consuming 40% of the resources of the world. And that includes its companies and corporations. In an unprecedented act, following the kidnapping of President Maduro, the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran was cruelly assassinated along with members of his family, his daughter-in-law, his wife, his grandchild. And this reflects on the nature of the system, which describes itself as a member of the United Nations, whereas it has signed and ratified the Charter of the United Nations, even though the Constitution of the United States mandates that it shall adhere, that the government shall adhere to and enforce all treaties and obligations arising from those treaties. It has shred the Charter of the United Nations as though it was so much piece of paper. And this is not the first time in its history. Eminent writer who hails from the Native American community, half Scottish and half Native American, Roxanne Dunbar Oritz, has recorded that the recent wars of colonization of the United States of America, whether in Iraq, whether in Afghanistan, whether in Syria, whether in Libya, and the other wars, including on the countries of the United States, of South America and Latin America and Africa, resemble the kind of wars which the United States of America waged on the Native Americans. That the genocide of the Native Americans was the beginning of the conquest of different countries of the world. And it is absurd that we have a planet in which hundreds of bases are maintained by one country, which claims to be democratic, which claims to be a member of the United Nations, and which preaches to the world what freedom and democracy are all about. For over half a century, the government and the companies and banks of the United States have waged war by financial and military means on Iran. Iran has never threatened the United States of America and has continued to negotiate. Every successive government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has been holding regular elections, has opened talks and negotiated with the United States of America. The policy advanced and the propaganda by the government of the United States is that the United States poses a threat to the USA, that it poses a threat to Israel, and therefore it is necessary for regime change. It is not a question of regime change only because the government of Iran is Islamic. Whatever the complexion of the government, if there is any government in Iran which protects its sovereign right to reserve its capital accumulation for the development of its own country, rather than flight of capital abroad, rather than serving the interests of companies, banks, and financial institutions of the imperialist world, that government will be attempted to be overthrown by the United States of America. And the United States has misused the Security Council for this purpose. The sanctions imposed on Iran were never justified. President Khamenei is on record. He had issued a declaration, or what in Islamic terms is a fatwa, that the production of an atomic weapon was contrary to the principles of the Quran and Islamic injunctions. Iran, hitherto, for over a century now, has not, the Islamic Republic of Iran did not have an atomic weapon. And yet it has been brutally and cruelly threatened. Articles of necessity have been denied to the population. Hardships have been imposed on the people of Iran. Economic hardships of an unprecedented degree. Essential items of medical equipment, essential items of food, the right to trade with other countries, the right to sell its resources, all have been denied to Iran. In fact, there is no debate at all as to who is responsible for the existing situation in the Middle East. We are all aware that it is the United States of America, jointly with Israel, who have colonized the Middle East, seek to colonize West Asia, and the United States is the senior partner in the alliance between the United States and Israel. Israel cannot exist without the United States of America. It is not an independent entity financially or economically. It survives on subsidies from the United States, from the EU, and all its weapon systems are supplied. Its most important weapon systems with which it wages war on behalf of the US-led NATO alliance, on behalf of the United States of America, are all supplied by the United States, followed by Germany, France, and other countries of the world. So Israel is not an independent entity, whatever the Zionist control on the financial institutions and banks of the United States, but it is not an independent entity. This is a joint aggression on behalf of the Anglo-Saxon, European, and Zionist world on the West Asia, which has always used the structure of racism and projected the myths of superior races, chosen people, an exceptional society to plunder the resources of the world. On the 11th March, the Gulf Cooperation Council introduced a resolution in the Security Council. And the terms of the resolution are that, in terms of the resolution, condemning Iran for attacking the Gulf countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council, which includes the Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, which is not a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council, and Saudi Arabia, etc. This resolution is a violation of the United Nations Charter. Article 51 of the Charter gives Iran the right to self-defense. We all are aware that in June 2025, the United States waged a brutal attack on the civilian nuclear enrichment facilities of Iran at Natanz, Fordo, etc. And in that attack, the bases of the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan were used for this attack. Any country which hosts US bases, any country which hosts bases for committing aggression on the neighborhood is involved in that war of aggression. And for the Gulf Cooperation Council to introduce a resolution which has been passed with the abstention of Russia and China, this resolution is not justified because these countries are involved as proxies in the imperialist war on Iran to a lesser degree than Syria. But nevertheless, all of them are involved. They have extended military and logistic assistance to the United States of America. Therefore, this resolution in international law is not a legal, just, and binding resolution at all. The resolution should have called upon all countries in the region to desist from granting military bases and logistic facilities to the United States of America. And it should have condemned the joint United States-Israeli attack on Iran whilst calling upon all parties to come to the negotiating table. But only after guarantees are given to the Sovereign Republic of Iran that no further attempt shall be made to in any way interfere with its economic, political, and security system. As far as the people of the United States are concerned, they face a serious dilemma. And that is, it is not enough to say that the government of the United States is responsible. It is not enough to say that the companies and corporations of the United States who run the political system of the United States and the people of the United States are aware that the United States Supreme Court has permitted special financial contributions to the electoral system, which actually obliterates the democracy in the United States of America, as it is no longer a republic. None of our countries can term and call themselves republics if our elections are financed by special financial interests or corporate interests. And it is these interests which dictate policies. With respect to the recent events of Venezuela, we are aware that in the secret councils held, the US oil companies and other investment firms were also brought on board, and the same applies with reference to Iran. It is therefore essential for the peace movement in the United States, not merely to speak about anti-war, not merely to say that we want peace, because these are slogans. They have to analyze for the people of their country as to where and when these decisions are taken. Because finally, it is the people of the United States also who are the enemy. Iran is only who are considered the enemy of the companies and corporations of the United States. It is not enough to say that we oppose the war. Who is going to analyze and lay bare as to where the national budget and how the national budget of the United States is being utilized, as the citizens of the United States are taxpayers, and they are in the final analysis going to pay for this war, not only pay for the war, but will also be involved in turn in the killing of their soldiers, in the destruction of the assets which have been created. And therefore, it is mandatory for the anti-war movement to analyze the economic factors, the basis of these companies and corporations who dictate peace and war, rather than the people of the United States. The United States has an early history of opposing wars of imperialism. And I would like to cite a very eminent citizen of the United States who was referred to even in the Thanksgiving speech of the mayor of New York, Mr. Mamdani. And that is the famous anti-war activist and socialist leader, Eugene Debs, who campaigned tirelessly to educate the people of the United States as to what were the forces behind the nature of the operations. How can the citizens of the USA live with so many genocides on their hands? You're involved in the genocide in Palestine. You're involved in the genocide on the Iraqi people. You're involved in the genocide on the people of Afghanistan. You're involved in the genocide on the people of the Horn of Africa. You are involved in the genocide on the people of Latin America and South America. And you are threatening a little island called Cuba only because its political system stands against your system, which is addicted to war. It is addicted to war, it is addicted to aggression, and it is addicted to using the resources of the world only in the interests of the profits of the companies and the corporations. There is a trajectory of events. This is not one event. This is a series of events extending across centuries. The situation is such now that the people of the United States are facing a situation where they may be regarded as the pariahs of the world. This from a situation where fantastic technological and other advances were made. But the system has eroded, the system has corroded. No political and economic system, no matter what profits it may have engendered in the past, can exist if it goes counter to the survivals of humanity. And the system which is addicted to war, any system which is addicted to war, stands frontally against humanity. So it is not only, Iran is in the front line of humanity. It is not a question, this war is not a question of the survival only of the Iranian people. This war is challenges all of us because it is our front line too. And therefore, a great deal of understanding and reflection of imperialism is required. It is a very destructive system. It is anti-humanity. And now we have reached a stage where the technological advances of companies, which we do not deny them, but we have to understand that those technological advances, whether it's AI or any other system, if not used in the interest of humanity, because the system does not allow it, it's not a question of whether it can be used or cannot be used. It can be used, but it is a political and economic system which allows this or does not allow it. The companies no longer need workers. On the basis of this technological advance, they can reduce the working class to a minimum if they are left unregulated, if they are left uncontrolled, and if the commanding heights of any economy, of a national economy, is placed in the hands of the few. That is oligarchy, that is not democracy, that is fascism, as we all know, that it is not we who coined the term that corporate power, merger with state power, results in fascism. And as we understand fascism, it is a system which not only destroys and will not only destroy the people of the United States of America, it will destroy the world. We have been through 2 world wars and we are in a third. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niloufer. Um, and and thank you for stating that the Iranian people's resistance to imperialist aggression is a front line, not just for them, but for all of us. That is indeed true. Nina, I'd like to invite you to take the floor now.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you to Suzanne and IADL and NLG for organizing this and inviting me. It's an honor to follow Niloufer and to be here with Niloufer and Corinna and Suzanne. So thank you all very much. I'm going to I think Niloufer really clearly spelled out the stakes, and I wholeheartedly agree with what she said. I'm going to continue with that discussion, but also talk specifically about Iran and Iran's role in the world. Um, and it's important for me to say that my comments are my sort of intellectual or legal or political comments are I saturated with my own feelings about this, especially because I have family in Iran. Most of my family is in Iran, and we can't reach most of them. We haven't been able to reach most of them since this began. Um, and so this is a very uh, difficult moment for me, for my family, for Iranians, for the people of the region, and it is a continuation of what the region has been going through for decades. That the peoples of the region have been going through for decades, and what the peoples of the global majority, the 80% of the world that is formerly colonized, has been going through for hundreds of years. So I'll start with talking about Iran, and then I want to talk about why Iran and why the axis of resistance now. And then I'm going to talk about, sort of continue what Niloufer said and talk about the stakes. And then Suzanne, just interrupt me if I go too long. Um, so Iran has been under siege. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been under siege for half a century now, for almost half a century now, by the United States specifically. Of course, Iran in general has been under siege since at least, but by the forces of European imperialism, since at least for over 100, well over 100 years and longer. But the U.S. siege on Iran began with the institution of the monarchy, the coup, the 1953 coup, and then especially after the Iranian Revolution of 1979, when Iran unequivocally demanded and won its sovereignty from imperialism. Immediately after the revolution, Iraq invaded Iran with the backing, at the urging, and with the material support of the United States in what is called a proxy war. Iranians call it the imposed war. Both Iran and Iraq suffered greatly as a result of that war, which lasted 8 years, so up until 1988. So imagine from the perspective of Iranians, there's this revolution that occurs in 79. Not a year later, the country's invaded. And so whatever rebuilding process or state building process that was to begin in that moment was halted by the invasion. This is similar to what happened with Nicaragua, because the Nicaraguans won their revolution at approximately the same time, and their revolutionary process was halted by the Contra War, the US sponsored, US backed, US Contra War. So Iran retained its sovereignty at great cost through that period. Iran is considered to have won that war because the claim, sort of the so-called objective of the war, was to win back, or not win back, win a region of Iranian land, and Iran didn't give up any of its land. But it's estimated that at least 1 million or more people were killed in the war. Shortly after that war, we all know, Iraq was invaded, or the first Iraq war began. The massive sanctions regimes growing sanctions regimes were imposed on countries, in different countries throughout the world and in the region, that only those sanctions regimes only accelerated over time. And then the invasion of Afghanistan, the second Iraq war, et cetera, et cetera. Iran is surrounded by, now you all know, if you didn't know, it's now quite clear. Iran is literally surrounded by dozens of US bases. Those US bases are actively used to thwart Iranian sovereignty. Despite all this, if you look at the human development statistics of Iran since 1979, their accomplishments are extraordinary. Literacy went up from the estimates are 25 to 35% of the population was literate before in 1976. Literacy is now in the 90 percentiles, like 95 or something like that. Literacy of women was even lower than that figure that I just shared, even lower than 35%. Now, not only is literacy of women, has it dramatically increased again into the 90s, but Iranian women are 60% of the university population. Estimates are that somewhere between 50 to 70% of STEM graduates in Iran are Iranian women. In terms of food sovereignty, Iran was importing a significant amount of its foodstuffs, even though it's a very rich, agriculturally rich environment. Prior to the revolution, it was importing. Now it's almost 80% food sovereign and actually a major global exporter for significant foodstuffs that people eat on a daily basis. And Iran has a healthcare system that was informed by and supported by, guess, the Cubans. So we are talking about a government that is not socialist or communist, right? And that we all know had its own fights with the socialists and the communists, right? But that over time, it has evolved and accomplished what a besieged socialist or communist government could accomplish. And now that's not to say that there aren't capitalists, there aren't aspiring capitalists in Iran, that there is equal distribution of wealth, that it's sort of a utopia. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I'm suggesting that if you think about human development as a relative matter and as a historical matter, Iran is far better as an independent and sovereign nation governed by the Islamic Republic than it was when it was a colonized, an indirectly colonized nation under the aegis of US imperialism, exploited by US and European imperialism. So here we are now, right, where Iran is continuing to affirm its sovereignty. It's continuing to demand its sovereignty. It now has the weapons to fight for its sovereignty through, again, a self-reliant endogenous program that it developed over the course of the last half century. And its sovereignty is being challenged, not because it's an Islamic republic, though that's part of it, and Islamophobia in general, not because it's like super, super repressive against women. It's like, no, these figures suggest that it might even be better for women than other places in the world. But it's really not that different than most places in the world when it comes to patriarchy and the treatment of women. It's because it seeks independence. And it's situated at a critical geostrategic location or juncture, at the juncture of 3 continents, multiple waterways, including the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb, close to Bab el-Mandeb, et cetera, the Caspian, the Gulf. And its support for Palestine is uncompromising and unequivocal. Its support for the regional resistance is uncompromising and unequivocal, to the point that the Iranian constitution has a line that says we will support the oppressed peoples of the world, which is what drove them to break ties with apartheid South Africa as soon as they came to power, even though they were one of the biggest suppliers of oil to apartheid South Africa. And then now in their national budget, they have a line item in their annual national budget for the Palestinian resistance, irrespective of faction. So this is why Iran is so important to empire. These three factors: its sovereignty, its ability to fight for its sovereignty, its willingness to do it, its location, which is the common thing that people say about the countries in our region, and its support of the regional resistance and of Palestine, its anti-imperialism. Also, I did an interview of Venezuela's former vice minister of foreign affairs, Carlos Ron, and a professor at University of Tehran, Dr. Marandi, back in December. We did the first part of the interview right before President Maduro was abducted, and then we did the second part. Added a second part after his abduction. Carlos talked so highly about Iran and actually said that Iran was one of the only nations in the world that came to their support when they were struggling the most. Iran was uncompromising in its support of Venezuela when its people were struggling the most as a result of sanctions. So this is the Iran that we're talking about that is constantly being demonized in the media right now. Now, what does this mean for the people on this call or people in the sort of international left, the anti-imperialist left in the US, et cetera? The world has reached a critical juncture, right? On the one hand, the US is fighting hard, fighting very, very hard, as Niloufer just said, to maintain its domination of the planet and the planet's resources and the planet's labor power. And it's willing to kill as many people as it needs to in order to do that. On the other hand, there's an emergent force that not only has had enough, but is now actually willing and able to defend itself and fight. That force includes Iran, it includes Venezuela, it includes Cuba and Nicaragua, and on the other side of the world, it also includes Russia and China and DPRK, et cetera. So whatever our feelings may be about any form of governance, and I tell my students this all the time. In fact, I teach administrative law for the lawyers in the crowd. Right now I'm teaching administrative law and legal history. In the fall, I taught civil procedure and critical race theory. So especially in civil procedure and in administrative law, I tell my students that in order to really understand these areas of law and how they develop over time, we have to do away with these ideas of dictatorship and democracy and autocracy and all that. Because the reality is that every single political system in the world has aspects of coercion and consent. And what I tell my students is that in the United States, I have to sell my labor in order to have a roof over my head or feed my family or even have health care. If I stop selling my labor because my employer is exploiting me or abusing me, I lose those things. That's not an arrangement that I consent to. I do not consent to that arrangement. I am coerced into that arrangement. And yet, we call the US a democracy, And countries throughout the world that have those things, whether you can work or not, they're called autocracies and dictatorships. So the reality is that however we may feel about these forms of government and what we're told about all these different forms of government that exist throughout the world, a new world is trying to bubble up above the surface. And the removal of US bases in the region is about creating that new world in our region. The removal of THAAD batteries from the Eastern Asia so that they can be moved to Western Asia to defend American forces and Zionist forces in Western Asia, that's about the depletion of protection for the forces of empire. And when the contradiction is so heightened, when it is so stark, when the conditions in the world are so stark, when we are faced with two positions, we must pick a side. We must pick a side. There is no other choice. If we don't pick a side, if we don't pick the side of humanity, if we pick the side of US imperialism because we fear Islamism and we fear communism and we fear socialism, and these projects never worked anyways, and look at Cuba and it's under siege and it's under attack. If we pick the wrong side, we stand to experience more and more of the live-streamed genocides that we are witnessing now in Palestine and Lebanon especially. The burning tents, the burning bodies that we just witnessed from Palestine and Gaza, it's happening in Lebanon now. So the stakes are many. And while it is important to debate and to disagree and to engage in political questions and, et cetera, it's important to pick a side right now. I'll end by saying just one thing. When I talked about the development indicators, so if you go to the UN development program and look at like human development indicators for nations throughout the world, Iran's is comparable to Cuba's. They're both right around 0.79 or 0.80, 0.8. That's significant. DPRK's is very high. So there is more to life than what we're told about the Islamic Republic or any other nation around the world. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. I believe that Corinna is having some technical difficulty. And so until she messages me, I don't think that she's going to be able to speak right now. Um, and I want to just invite anybody on this call to ask any questions you'd like to ask. Feel free to use the chat or to use the Q&A icon. But I would just like to sort of follow up with a couple of questions of my own for the both of you. A few things kind of like come to mind. You've been talking, about, the imperative of political clarity and picking sides, like really kind of picking a side. Like, are we on the side of imperialism, right? Or are we on the side of humanity, as both you and Niloufer say, and like and of future of humanity? And you've touched a little bit on like what prevents particularly the left in the West to have that kind of political clarity. And I do believe, and it's the same when we're talking about the whole region and other resistance forces like Hamas and Hezbollah, that there is an inherent Islamophobia, but there is also an inherent liberalism. and taught to sort of like think about, as you said, governance in these binaries of good and bad, and in kind of an exploitation of liberal ideas like the liberation of women, as if invading Iraq or having war in Iran is supposed to be liberatory to us women in the global South, or to any other sectors in our communities. And this is sort of a constant. This is a constant, right? Um, so I want to, kind of then just sort of like reiterate this, just to invite both of you to speak a little bit more about this, right? And like how we organize against this, kind of like in lack of political clarity in the imperial core. Niloufer, you are not based in the imperial core, but what are strategies to sort of challenge that? Um, Another question that came to mind has to do with, and Nina, this is particularly kind of focused on how we're seeing the media in the West, but Niloufer, I'm also curious as to like how this is being talked about in India as well, like or in South Asia. Um, I feel like that there is a deliberate underreporting of what is happening in this war in the United States. There is a cover up as to the casualties, the injuries on the U.S. military. There is a cover up on how powerful Iran has been in its response, right? And there's a cover up on what we're hearing through the grassroots about increasing dissent by U.S. military officers themselves. Um, and and I think that also leaves many of us sometimes with the inability to know where to look for news, except, amongst comrades, right? And and to also kind of like understand what we think will happen next. Um, and another question that I have is in relation to, the multi polarity, and what happened at the Security Council. There's a lot of chatter on social media about Russia and China's abstaining from the vote as opposed to vetoing. And I saw something that you wrote on social media, Nina, last night about how the UN is at best a diplomatic sideshow, and that it's not there to reflect like what really is the reality of alliances and goals of multipolarity, etc. I'd love for you to talk more about that. Um, and there's also, yeah, no, there was just thank you, Hester, for your comment. So and those are my questions. I might have more after, but please, Niloufer, would you like to start?
You read because there's been break in your sentences. Suzanne, can you
Sorry,
hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Suzanne,
Yes. Can you hear me, Niloufer?
Suzanne, Suzanne, there's not your. Can you hear me?
You're
Suzanne,
breaking up. You're breaking up a little bit.
hello,
Um,
hello,
I can hear you. Can you
Suzanne,
hear me?
can you hear me? I'm not able to hear your question immediately. Can you repeat? Because there was chaos. Hello,
Yeah, I think it's
hello,
um Nina, why don't you go ahead and I'll
hello.
check in with Niloufer.
And so I take the questions to be basically like two questions, the on organizing in the core, and then the multipolarity Security Council question. In terms of organizing, I will say that I mean I'd love to hear like from folks in the audience because there are some great organizers in the audience. Um, Yesterday, the Center for Conscience and War posted on social media that starting this December, registration for the draft will become automatic and involuntary. And there was a vote regarding this in Congress, I think, this week. I don't know the details of it, and this is not an area of law that I know, but NLG does. And and so I do think that this is going to become, as it did during the Vietnam War, a site of political struggle in the United States across a variety of different vectors. And I don't know to what I don't know to what extent people understand that the U.S. public understands what is happening. Um, Even if the war on Iran ends in the next few weeks, as they're saying, or September, as they also said, or later, uh, the war on Lebanon appears like it's going to expand. Um, and Iraq and the Iraqi resistance is a factor here as well. So it looks like there is going to be, if not direct warfare against Iran and Lebanon and Palestine all the time, there is going to be sort of um, a moving war type scenario, which there has been in the region for decades. Uh, and with the sort of decline of US military prowess vis-a-vis Russia, China, and Iran in particular, they're going to need more boots. Those boots are going to make up for the technology. Well, you know, allegedly. So I think this is something that's really significant, and people need to be made to understand this. Uh, in terms of building a broad anti-war movement, we did that with Iraq, a huge one. Suzanne and I worked together back then, um, and it wasn't able to prevent the wars, the many wars that hit the region. So there, now I'm not saying that that shouldn't happen again. There needs to be a broad anti-war movement across the U.S., but we also need to rethink our approach to sort of national broad anti-war movements and think about how to organize at the grassroots and local levels to really make people understand how this sort of growing war is going to impact their lives. There needs to be a national force, and there needs to be a lot of local activity as well. And I think local activity could take many forms, like civil disobedience and all the things that happened during the Contra War. The Vietnam War is the primary model when we think about movement work, but actually a lot of the work that was done against the Contra War was really, really amazing. And I think people should take time to learn about that work. In terms of multipolarity, but again, I would love to hear from folks in the chat about organizing. So Iran and China, when the war broke out in Ukraine, and it was a Russian operation against the expansion of NATO, which had been occurring for years. When that war broke out, and there was a vote in the UN General Assembly, both Iran and China abstained. Now, I recognize that the UNGA is different than the UN Security Council. I don't need to be explained that difference. But the fact of the matter is that the abstention is used as a strategic tool for the anti-imperialist bloc nations. especially the ones that are in active warfare. I don't understand how or why that is a tool that they use, because I'm not like a student of international institutions and politics, or the politics of international institutions. But it's obvious that there's a pattern there, and they've been doing this for many years. And so I don't think that we can dismiss the support that Russia and China have provided Iran, and all the technological support, etc. And also all the statements that they made. They made very strong statements against the US invasion at the very beginning. I don't think we can dismiss all that stuff because they have abstained in the Security Council yesterday. Even if they had vetoed in the Security Council, I'm not really sure that there would have been any major consequences, right? And so this, when I said the diplomatic sideshow, this is what I mean. What happens at the UN is important. I don't mean to suggest that it doesn't matter at all, but it's not a determinative force in the world. The UN is not a determinative force in the world. And Russia and Iran and China have clear alliances. They are working closely together. And no UN vote is going to undermine that or even be reflective of that. Oh, you're on mute, Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Nina. Um, Niloufer, would you like to weigh in? I just wanted to see now if this works for you. If you can unmute. Can you unmute?
Can you hear me now?
I think you're breaking up. Can you unmute again?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you keep your mute button keeps going on and off? Can you unmute yourself one more time, please? Okay, can you speak now? Can you speak now, Niloufer, so we can see if we can hear you? Yeah, do you want to switch the camera off?
Can you hear me now, Suzanne?
Yes. You might want to switch the video off. Maybe we'll hear you better. Okay. We'll come back. Niloufer, do you want to try to speak? Okay. We'll come back to her. You're on mute again. Okay. Please start.
Hello.
Yes, please proceed. Can you hear me? Niloufer, can you hear
Can you
us?
hear me?
Yes, please proceed. Yes.
I, or you can hear me.
Yes.
You see, Suzanne, there were interruptions when you're recording, when you were speaking,
Okay.
and
I can
requesting
repeat.
me all that yeah, please repeat. Please repeat.
I can. Yes. So I was I was talking about the UN um, Security Council and Russia and China's abstaining in the vote yesterday. You mentioned it. Nina also touched on it very well. But anything that you might want to add to that? I was talking about the lack of media coverage in the West in particular, as to how this war is playing out and how powerful Iran's resistance has been, but also underreporting on the injuries and deaths of uh, U.S. soldiers and an increasing kind of knowledge of dissent that is coming from the ranks of U.S. military in this war. And I also talked about the inability for particularly the left in the West to have the kind of political clarity that it needs in order to challenge imperialism. Because of the very kind of Islamophobic and liberal ideas that were taught in the imperialist core. And perhaps that's something you can also talk about from the perspective of how the discourse is playing out in India and South Asia as well.
You see, Suzanne and colleagues, there is a vast difference in certain countries between the position of the government and people. For example, in India, there at the government level, some kind of understanding has been reached between the government of India and the government of the United States, the government of Israel. An understanding has been reached. However, the people of India have clearly grasped the issue, and even more so because it was preceded by the so-called tariff agreement with the United States of America, which is a clear declaration of economic and financial recolonization of India. So it is because the tariff agreement preceded the events that understanding developed as to what are really the United States objectives in this entire region. And even just prior to that was the kidnapping of President Maduro. These issues could not have been ignored by any organization in India, because anti-imperialism is not the monopoly of the left. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
It is not the monopoly. Taking position anti-imperialism is not a monopoly of traditional left or the new left or a left, because the reality is that recent decades have shown that there were and there are a number of left parties who did not even understand the issue that as far as the Islamic Republic of Iran was concerned, it was consistently taking an anti-imperialist position. Of course, on the other hand, there were countries like Venezuela, there were countries like Cuba, who really have a far better understanding of what is anti-imperialism, who extended their hand of solidarity to Iran because they understood that Iran stood with them on the issue of anti-imperialism, on the issue of sovereignty of the people, on the issue of deploying sovereignty over resources and deploying those resources for the development of their own people, rather than for the capital flight or for the development of the empire. So this is not an issue. Anti-imperialism is not an issue exclusively for the left or only of the left. This is a wrong position. And in today's situation, you don't have to be necessarily left to take an anti-imperialist position, because this is a question of the survival of humanity. What is anti-imperialism all about? The survival of civilization, the survival of societies, the survival of humanity. This is not an abstract issue. This is not an issue of jargon. This is a real life issue. Will our societies be able to replace ourselves? Unless, and can this so-called truth of resources to imperialist centers, what is the impact and what is the effect it will have on our societies? You have seen the impact on the Palestinians. Palestine is an anti-imperialist issue. It's an anti-colonial issue. It is not a Muslim issue, as people like to project. The Islamic Republic of Iran is not a Muslim issue. It's an anti-imperialist issue. And the reality is that any government, any political system which is voted into power by the people in different continents, different countries of the world, if it stands for anti-imperialism, in this period which we have seen post-2001, when the acute crisis of the Western economic systems, which were imploding economically from within, were revealed, countries started being recolonized one after the other. You just read the 100 Orders of Paul Bremer, who was in charge of Iraq, who was imposed on Iraq after the war. If you read those 100 orders, it is clearly it was recolonization of Iraq. What is going on in Lebanon? The Greater Israel Project is a project of recolonization of the entire Middle East in the interests, in imperial interests, in the interests of the United States. The population of Israel does not belong to Palestine. They all have dual citizenship with microscopic sections are indigenous to Palestine. The rest are all citizens of imperialist centers, whether from Europe or from the United States of America. The Greater Israel Project is a colonial project for Lebanon, for Syria, for the entire Levant, and even part of Egypt. That this military base, this small military base, which is Israel, needs to be extended even further so that Africa can be controlled and even South Asia can be controlled. We have a Zionist presence in India also. Controls several aspects of our security and economy. And as far as multipolarity is concerned, it's been a severe disappointment in a sense. I am not casting aspersion on those who conceive the concept of multipolarity. And we do need a multipolar world. But the manner in which it has operated, for example, absolute silence from BRICS. This is how can you have an organization which claims to cooperate, which does not react to such a major issue as an attack on a member state of the SCO and of the BRICS? Iran is a very major country in this alliance. And the contradictions within BRICS have shown up, because some members of the Gulf Cooperation Council and others are members of the BRICS. Now, how do you have an organization in which some of its members are allied with imperialism, and the United States and NATO, and others who oppose it? There's a fundamental conflict there, which Russia and China do not desire to focus on, the Russian Federation and China. They are shy to focus on this issue because they have built it up, putting at core the issue consists. But on imperialism, on private deals with the United States company incorporations. Can there be a consensus? And the whole issue of alternative trading arrangements, the whole issue of an alternative currency. These are issues, again, not only from the economic point of view. It is how do we create a more balanced world? That's what it's about. How do we finally remove empires from the world, from this planet? How do we remove that from the geopolitical space of the planet? Because we don't need empires. We have seen what empires do. They devastate the world like locusts. I repeat,
Right.
like locusts. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi was asked a very important question on the eve of Indian independence. He was asked, what kind of an economic system will you have in India after independence? Will it like the political and economic system of the UK, that's Great Britain, which was the colonial power on its retreat? And Mahatma Gandhi's reply was, no, we do not wish to emulate the political and economic system of Great Britain because this kind of a system amounts to stripping the world of all its resources like locusts. This is what he exactly said, and I'm repeating his words. That what he meant was this imperial system of empire in Great Britain is such that if countries were to adopt this system, we will be stripping the world like locusts. Because
Thanks,
we have
Niloufer.
to understand. This is what he said.
Thank you, Niloufer. I just want to move on to maybe a few more questions before we end. Thank you very much for those answers. That I think that from your perspective, based in India, I think that like really helped complement what Nina already shared. I want to just mention that I put in the chat a link to the website of the National Lawyers Guild Military Law Task Force. They have a very good page on there called Frequently Asked Questions on Refusing Illegal Orders, which is a right that members of the military have, and that is connected to really kind of the principles of international law, of the responsibility, not just of states, but all of us to not participate in the violations of international law. It's also something that's been used to defend people who have been, fired from their jobs for standing up for Palestine, etc. Take a look at that. I wanted to mention, since Nina mentioned the resistance to sort of the war in Nicaragua, that we actually are joined by one of our comrades from Nicaragua, Colleen. Welcome, Colleen. And I just want to also mention a little bit of like what's been said in the chat. And I really appreciate what you said, Niloufer, about like anti-imperialism is not the monopoly of the left, right? I mean, that really resonates with me because, as somebody who my parents are from Jordan, and I've always referred to my friends and family from the Arab world as being anti-imperialist by default, right? Because as a colonized region, that is how we look at the world. Like, our whole existence is sort of part of this kind of like uh, past colonization and neo-colonial and imperialist narrative, right? We can't remove ourselves from it. But that's different, I think, sometimes for people who live in the imperial core, and there's a lot of folks who are anti-war, or who like speak for peace, who are not anti-imperialist, right? And that's not to say that they can't be, or perhaps they are moved or motivated by particular principles that are like central to anti-imperialism, right? But we really have to do the work of making that connection and drawing that out. Like, there's a lack of internationalism that is sadly kind of inherent to a lot of organizing that happens, and a lack of awareness that there's the privilege that comes with being in the imperialist core, right? And you know, and a lack of kind of awareness that we really should kind of be looking to the anti-imperialist struggles in the global south to guide us, or the anti-colonial struggles in the global south to guide us, as opposed to sort of the arrogant kind of attitude that like that's going to come from the left in the West, as you put it, Niloufer, or the left in intelligentsia or academia or etc. Um, but one of the questions in the chat um, had to do with like, why does the US treat the Zionists as more important than everyone else in the world? Well, I think that that is a loaded question, right? And I think that there's sort of uh, like a kind of like a narrative that's kind of being put out there about this war being fought for Israel, which I think is inaccurate, right? And I think that this is something that we also try to remind people when we talk about the Palestinian struggle and how and how entrenched it really is in current U.S. imperialism, but historical kind of colonialist and imperialist designs, right? I mean, going back decades, really. And that sort of like the sort of Western kind of colonization of the region, um, and that kind of like really brings us back to one of the other things that's been mentioned in the chat, which is like, Greater Israel, which is sort of what the Zionist project, which is the Zionist project itself is one of the purest representations of US empire, right? That has been placed in the region in order to fulfill the goals of historical and current imperialist designs. It's connected to world capitalism, right? Now, that entity drew the lines of what they wanted Greater Israel to be even before the borders of Sykes-Picot were finalized, right? This Greater Israel, and this kind of brings me back to this discussions about the Gulf countries and Jordan. There's something like we're really kind of like watching, for example, what's happening in Bahrain, right? Because in the period of the Arab uprisings, that was a place in which we saw a lot of really important resistance to the regime, right? Um, and similarly, this is an opportunity, I think, to first of all talk like discuss, particularly in the Arab world, like okay, why are these embassies being targeted? Why are these bases being targeted, right? There's a good reason. Let's remind ourselves that they shouldn't be here. They shouldn't be here. This is a violation of the sovereignty of our nations, of the people of the Arab world, right? It's a good opportunity to have that discussion. And I'm just sort of wondering if, particularly you, Nina, if you had any thoughts about like, whether or not like how this moment is an opportunity for opening kind of more discoursive resistance in places like, in Jordan and in the Gulf, where it is historically so repressive and difficult and challenging. Especially when we remind people of the Greater Israel Plan, and if we remind people how close the Zionists are encroaching on our borders, particularly now that they control Syria. Like, I've always like, the some of the violence we're seeing now being played out in Syria are so close to the borders of other Arab nations now, right? And it's um and so is this an opportunity for our movements to sort of like rethink kind of what it means for us to sort of protect our nations and our sovereignty, right? Um, Especially when it's clear that our governments are not going to be doing that. Um, and I just wanted to make sure, yes, I mean, there are a lot of comments also about like, the intersections between um, this sort of this imperialism and fascism, and including like the way the fascist manifestation of police forces in the U.S., like ICE. There's been some questions also about like where can we find kind of alternative media? I think it's prudent to sort of be critical of any media that we consume, whether on social media or like other like news programs. But perhaps some sources. And then also, there are others on the chat who have asked questions about like readings, or articles, or maybe some other like videos, to help kind of inform their own narrative, especially when we're all constantly being approached or challenged with the same kind of like liberal tropes about women's liberation, about Islamophobic tropes, etc. So, I can always kind of compile those resources and email it to all the participants afterwards if we don't have time to put it in the chat. But I just wanted to just throw all that out there and then maybe have both of you just kind of like end with your answers to that. Nina, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll try to make it quick. So on the, I'm gonna write this down. So on the Gulf and Jordan questions, it's really remarkable if for those of you that saw the videos that were coming out of the Gulf, when the bases were being struck at the beginning of the week, especially, the people in the Gulf were like cheering and so excited. And as we know, the people of Jordan, the population of Jordan is partially indigenous, like Suzanne, and then a lot of Palestinians that were forced out of Palestine. Um, and the overwhelming majority of the people of Jordan are very much against their government and Zionism, even if at times they are, unwilling to take decisive action against it. But there have been massive protests in Jordan against the actions of the government and Israel. Um, and so the reality is that the majority of the peoples of the Arab region are anti-imperialists, as Suzanne said. And like I think all of us throughout the world, given, a distilling of the contradiction, right, of the what is of the two forces that are in struggle, and also in addition to that, given like a vision of what could happen to the world if one side wins or the other side wins, right? I think just like in the US and anywhere else in the world, the people of the Arab region would pick the right side, right? But people need to be it needs to be clarified and explained that there is possibility and promise in the anti-imperialist position, perhaps for the first time since the early 1990s or the late 80s. So if we can convey that promise and that possibility to people in the US, to people around the world, and especially in the Arab region, and I think the people in the Arab region are now seeing it sort of happen, um, then we sort of consolidate and solidify the base, the anti-imperialist base, which Niloufer and Suzanne both talked about. Multipolarity is not like supposed to be an end in itself. It's supposed to be a pathway to a better world where there's respect for cultures and cultural differences, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not supposed to be viewed as like an end. It's just a pathway. And it has all the problems and challenges that Niloufer stated, but it also holds promise, especially when you compare it to unipolarity, which is the world that we have been in up until very recently. I'm there. I really appreciate the discussion in the chat group, and I can't, for some reason, I can't like respond to it. Um, but I'm gonna send some resources to Suzanne to compile. Um, I want to address the woman life freedom question. So the reality is that Iran is no longer enforcing hijab restrictions. The current government is no longer enforcing hijab restrictions, which means that women can wear whatever they want. And that seems to be what like Americans are consumed by, what Iranian women wear and are allowed to wear, which is in itself such a problematic framework. It's unbelievable, right? Like the forced deveiling of Iranian women, um, as if freedom, the path to freedom for the female, for the female human body, is exposure of that body, is so problematic that I don't even, it's disgusting, right? Because if you situate that with the reality of Iranian women, right? The development indicators, the education, etc. You've got a very different picture of what freedom, not just of the state of Iranian women, but of what freedom is. And perhaps, maybe American women haven't reached the pinnacle of freedom or feminism or liberation that they seem to have that they seem to believe they have attained. So I'm going to try to find resources to share that are like, for movement building and stuff around the woman question. But I know like how seasoned and sophisticated members of this audience are when it comes to organizing. And so I want to also share with you that the questions are not like, it's just, there's a fundamental problem with the woman question in the United States. And I think that needs to be unpacked or addressed because the woman question in Iran is being viewed through the lens of the woman question in the United States, which is so distorted, right? And the Epstein situation exposes it. It exposes it. It exposes the violence against women, the underdevelopment and violence against women in the US. And they're concerned with women in Iran. So, there's a lot to the woman question that's unfolding as we speak. And yeah, I guess. Anyways, thank you all very much. It's an honor really to be speaking to this audience, to be alongside Suzanne and Niloufer and Corinna, and I really, really appreciate this. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the work that you all do. And, until victory, which is coming.
Thank you so much, Nina. That was really brilliant. Always appreciate your contribution. Niloufer, please help us get some more insight into these questions.
Yes, I would like to address this whole issue of anyone being as absurd as to justify the invasion of Iran, the attack against Iran, and the financial and economic sanctions imposed against Iran on the absurd basis that because the Iranian women are being made to wear a hijab, or they're being made to dress in a particular manner, that this justifies the bombing of civil nuclear facilities in any country, or that this justifies the sanctions imposed on Iran, including using the Security Council in the past, starving the population. How does it help the women of Iran if you attack their civilian nuclear facilities? How does it help the women of Iran if you impose sanctions and starve the women and children of medical facilities? How does it help the women of Iran when you bomb the refinery and carry on a kind of attack by chemical means with Iran being surrounded by black smoke? This is absurd. Would I justify the invasion of the United States saying that women in the United States are totally commodified? They are commodities, as I look at it. And the Epstein issue is evidence of how young children and young women have been criminally commodified. But can I justify the invasion of the United States of America and the pillaging of its resources, saying that because this has happened? I mean, this is wholly absurd. And I would like to inform you that during the reign of the Shah of Iran, the Shah's family sister was running brothels in Tehran for foreigners. I have defended hundreds of Iranian students who faced deportation from India during the period of the Shah on the request of Savak. And they informed me that this is what was happening to the women of Iran. They were being herded into these brothels in Tehran. And the situation was such, Nina has already informed you, that the literacy rate of the population was below 25%, and that of women was much, much lower. And you want to attack the Islamic Republic of Iran, which now has a literacy rate of women of 95%, with women represented in every department, with women represented in science, in the scientific field, 50 to 70% science graduates are women. I mean, this is totally absurd. Would you like to invade India? Because in certain parts of my country, people are still wearing the sari as a veil, and they are lowering the sari in front of the father-in-law, the brother-in-law, etc. Would you like to invade India on that ground? I mean, this is absurd. This is a complete confusion of what is happening. You don't understand what is happening. Just like in the US, it's considered all right to strip yourself of all clothes. In our countries, our culture demands a certain degree of modesty. That doesn't mean that I support any kind of compulsory hijab or anything compulsory. But for anybody, anyone in their senses, not to see the total transformation of the working class sections, of middle class income sections, of Iranian women into something quite different from what they were under the Shah. I mean, you have missed the complete transformation. This issue is not about what clothes women wear. This issue is about whether societies and countries are sovereign and free to use their own labor power, their own resources to develop their societies, and for empires to retreat from this world. Empires controlled by companies, corporations, and financial institutions to retreat from this world. That does not mean that we are saying that we will not have companies. Of course, we'll have companies, but they will not control the politics or the economic policies of our country. There will be regulations put in place as to how they are to go about. And in my constitution, there are those regulations. But unfortunately, they are in a chapter which is not enforceable by law. But we cannot permit a company or a financial institution which starts operating throughout the world like an octopus and is ready to perpetrate in the final analysis even genocide to impose the capture of resources on any region of the world. This is not about hijab. This is not about why women are being made to wear hijab, etc. This is an issue for the Iranian women, and they've sorted it out. And Pezeshkian government has now said, as it is, many concessions had been made earlier. But you must remember what happened during the Shah of Iran. That the Shah's family, in particular his sister, was running brothels in Tehran. You must understand this whole hijab and all other issues in that context. Of course, I have to say, whereas Islam, one of the objectives of Islam was to emancipate women. However, patriarchal forces in different regions of the world took over Islam and then interpreted it to suit their requirements for what they wanted as the social and economic organization of society. You must understand it in this context and not in the context of of the fact that you can finance NGO organizations to organize some kind of a violent coup against the government, which is fighting for the survival of the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niloufer, for those additional comments. And once again, thank you for joining us at this late hour from India. Um, and Nina, once again, thank you so much and for participating. I mean, we know this is like a difficult time for you and your family, despite the all the great work that you continue to do. And just, want to say that like we hope that all of your people are safe. And anything that you need us to do, let us know. Um, and I want to thank everybody who joined us. We actually did have participation, not just from the US, but from several different countries, as I've noticed. And which is great, which is good to sort of have these in an hour where we can be joined by others. Oh, from Manila as well. That's excellent, and that's good to see. I see also Greece. I see Germany. I didn't really get to look at all the whole list. But thank you, everyone. And I will follow up with resources that Nina shares with me or Niloufer or anyone. And yeah, do kind of be on the lookout for any follow-up webinars that we might hold. And solidarity with Iran and its resistance, solidarity with Cuba, solidarity with Venezuela, solidarity with anti-colonial, anti-imperialist struggle everywhere, solidarity with Gaza. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are.